Good evening, everybody. This is the regularly scheduled city council meeting for general government. And tonight we're talking about the balanced scorecard, and I guess we need a roll call.
Councilmember Dennehy,
I'm here.
absent. Oh, Councilmember Swisher,
Here.
Councilmember B. Smith, absent. Councilmember Stein,
Here.
Councilmember Tracy,
Here.
Councilmember Worthington,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick,
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Here.
Thank you for that, Cindy.
Did I say it that soft?
They were, who knows? Okay, so Ryan, you want to take us through the balanced scorecard?
Sure. Yeah, so the Balanced Scorecard is a strategic planning tool, and this is an exercise that city council, actually a couple city councils ago, went through. And we're in the process of cascading these down to the department level, setting goals and measures. So that is what you have attached. So the premise behind the Balanced Scorecard is that measurement motivates. So looking at ways to measures that align with the strategic goals and objectives of the city, and measuring those on a department level basis, and having those funnel up to the goals of that city council set for the city scorecard. Do have several departments, heads, managers here to talk about their particular areas. If there are questions, and Chief Chick representing the police department, Rick Carmen is representing the community vitality department, and Tammy and Elijah are representing the administration scorecard. And I will be representing all the public works scorecards. As well as human resources. So you have the scorecards in front of you. I don't know that we want to go through each one, but definitely want to get feedback from council and see if we're on track, or if we need to make some tweaks and go from there.
So the first page is Canyon City goals. Those are the goals for the entire organization. Is that correct?
Correct. Those
And
were the objectives that were set by council way back when, and the template that we used to cascade everything down.
And then to the cascade down, that was yourself and other staff members that did the cascading.
Correct.
Who were the other members?
Folks that you have here, each took departments and had their own teams. So it was typically made up of department heads and senior managers.
Okay, and then each of the departments did the same thing. Cascaded down.
Yep.
And then administration is basically your department. Is that
So
correct?
administration is HR, finance,
IT
IT,
and clerk.
and the city clerk's office.
Thank you.
Community vitality is that's economic development, planning, building, and we included the public information officer as part of community vitality.
Couple of general comments. I don't want to jump in front of anyone who might be just. Shall I go ahead?
Sure.
Okay. Just generally, what popped out at me, just a couple of things that I wondered if we wanted to talk about or do more with over time. One of them, that general strategic objective of spending tax dollars efficiently and responsibly. I think the theme I noticed, and I hope I didn't miss something important here, was often that got played out in the sense of completing projects, percent of city projects finished on time and budget, things like that, and I wondered if for things that are less project oriented, wondered if we could think of a way to throw in a measurement over time. That there's other ways. I mean, obviously, we focus on that when it comes to the bidding process, and I think that fits well into that when we're bidding on something that the city is purchasing. But I wonder for things that are more overarching, like when we can't put something out to bid, like the electric bill or the gas bill, things like that, if there's a way to kind of look at those things, figure out over time how to spend the tax dollars more efficiently. And my other general comment,
Do you mind if I make a
Either way.
comment on top of that comment?
yeah, go ahead.
Just one other thing I guess I would add in addition to what you said is figuring out how we're determining the project, ensuring that the projects that we're determining are spending the tax dollars efficiently and responsibly. I think it's also really important. So right now the measurement is just like on the project that have been determined, are they being done on time and on budget? That's the actual planning process. I think captures a big piece of spending tax dollars. Tax dollars.
And further on top of that, I felt like implementing, like it talked about identifying things in the comprehensive plan. And maybe taking that further and plugging in those comprehensive plan priorities into this. And those could be part of this. measurements.
Yeah, and I think overarching, that's kind of the direction we're headed, where, those projects are pulled from the comprehensive plan and, plugged into the budgets through that process. So I think that's the feedback we've heard from council previously, is that, we want to be working on projects that fit into the plans that we've already developed.
The priorities that we helped to go through a month ago. We want to make sure, and it looks to me as if hopefully that's where it then drills down to actual individual departments and how it's going to be carried out if possible, because I'm sure just talking about like streets and
Sure.
material costs and so forth, things change.
And so that I would say, remember that this was a process that we went through. Okay, the council at that time, because we started with the perspective theme column on the left. And council developed strategic objectives to go with each of those themes. And these are the words that we chose to represent those themes. And so, the things that I've heard are all valid ideas and ways that we can use to measure things like that. And like electric bills and things like that. But so what happened though is that the strategic objective column was then taken, the measures were then developed through the process with city staff. They're the ones that develop the measures to do that.
And I think at least what we're saying so far is maybe there's some other great measures to add, not to take
Sure.
any of these out, but for example, the other overall area that jumped out at me was community engagement, that some of the wonderful measures here, using My Canyon City hashtags or number of proposed promotional events held, things like that, don't, to me, get out the two-way communication that we want to do. And so maybe we can add in some measures, or again, over time, that would measure that other side of the communication, making sure that we're hearing from the community. We've done those things, but I think it'd be nice to
Well,
reflect that.
And I would like to say, we don't necessarily have to wait over time. I think some of these things need to be tweaked now. Like, is hashtags really meaningful? No, I mean, that was like 8 years ago, a big deal, and for
Is
me,
that
there's-
when they were invented? I don't remember.
yeah, hashtags. But, yeah, so some of it, yeah. Just for me, there's some other things for establishing, especially in establishing, promoting and nurturing community. Having every single department make educational videos for social media, that's awful lot of educational materials and I mean, and I like to see posts about, look what we found in the storm drains, today. And I mean, it's super educational and I like to see those things, but there's so much more that we can be doing. Whether it's, plugging in public art, or now the 150th will be over, maybe putting up a different banner that brands Canyon City moving forward into the future across Highway 50, or the events that we do, or making sure that, in public safety, that our business, how much reducing interfaces of our business with homeless populations, or making sure everyone feels safe in their neighborhoods. And those are the things that our people care about, not hashtags or a plethora of social media posts that doesn't even reach all of our population.
So what would you, so we're starting to react to the measures. What would you like us, what would be the right outcome of this meeting for you, Ryan? Do you want us to say, yes, this one, no, that one, you need to go back, or what?
Yeah, I think if there are hard no's, absolutely. Hashtags, that was one that was on there originally, and happy to change something like that, because that one is older and outdated. Some of those educational videos, it's not just for social media, channel 191, where we are hitting a different demographic on channel 191.
And I'm saying don't do them, I'm just saying we need more than just that.
I have some like general comments that also feed into that. If that's okay.
Sure.
So first off, thank you so much. Like, I know that what we have in front of us may just seem like a stack of papers, but I also know that it was likely dozens, if not hundreds of hours of work and thinking and meetings, and just know that we really appreciate it. And I think sometimes when it is this detailed, it's easy to hop in and be like, this and this and this and this, but like, we know how much work and how much effort and how much care and thought went into it. I also think it's an incredibly important and worthwhile initiative, because measuring our city's departments will enable effective management and planning and analysis and accountability, and it will enable us to better understand if the activities that we're undertaking and proposing to undertake are actually moving us closer to the strategic objectives and priorities in all of our planning documents. And also enable us to course correct if they're not. But I think that in order for the document to be like a truly effective management tool, we need to ensure that we're measuring the right things, like the things that, are truly what our citizens care about and what we need as a city. And we need to make sure that we're, that the measurements will actually tell us whether or not we're reaching those objectives. So part of my concern is that I think some of the measurements are activities rather than actual measurements. So, the number of educational department videos created, like that's an activity. Like, are you creating them? It's not actually getting you at the measurement of whether or not you are accomplishing community
How
engagement.
effective were they?
Exactly. Or analyzing equipment downtime, like doing an analysis is an activity. I mean, I think that the measurement is whether or not your equipment is being utilized, like what percentage of the time is it being utilized. And I think that by picking measurements that are more indicators of what we're trying to accomplish, we'll actually be able to see whether or not we're achieving those goals. And then in some cases, I think that we're not necessarily, I don't mean to pick on the police department, I'm sorry, Touche, but I think in some cases we aren't necessarily getting to the true heart of what a department's mission is. So like for me, law enforcement is about, maintaining public order, preventing crime, bringing offenders to justice. By enforcing the law, apprehending offenders, assisting in their prosecution. And I think what we have, and that's just an example, but I think what we have are like a lot of fantastic things that we want to do, that we absolutely should do, and that we hope will get to the heart of what the mission is. But I'm just concerned that, if we have, 4 community training events annually, like, will that enable us to measure whether or not that effectively engaged people? And I really don't mean to pick on the police department, because I think the same thing could be said for like the streets department, because what we hear about so often is the roads are terrible, but there's very little in here about like, are the quality of the roads being maintained, or are they further degrading, or are they getting better? And it's more about the activities that we're gonna try to do around the roads. So those are just some overarching thoughts. I have lots of individual thoughts on every, on every single measure. But I think part of what we need to do is make sure that we're picking the things that people care about, and then that we're really picking measures to see whether or not we're achieving those objectives, as opposed to listing the activities that we think will get us to those objectives.
So would a good outcome of this meeting be to be able to say on each measure, whether it's an activity or not? I mean, so categorically, essentially if I heard you correctly, I'm asking for understanding. So if I heard you correctly, you're saying categorically that activities aren't necessarily, they're things that can be measured, but they're not necessarily related to the perspectives or themes that we're trying to achieve.
They're not measurements in and of themselves. So like
Yes,
doing an analysis is not a measurement.
yes,
And then that's an activity that you would need to do. And then, or like
Well, there's
a more clear example would be when your police department implement and maintain the real-time customer service software Cupid. I think we all agree that is a fantastic, very much needed thing so that you can get that real-time feedback. But the implementation of it in and of itself isn't telling you whether or not you're establishing a culture of great customer service. Right, so like once you've implemented it, then you can say, the measure is percentage of favorable reviews on QHIT, and our target is, I don't even know, 70% are favorable.
Well, I mean, some activities are kind of necessary and do it. So I don't think we can say there can't be any activities. I think for some that would be appropriate. And like for that, I'm questioning, we haven't implemented and started software Qubit yet? Because I thought we talked about that.
We are
a long
still
time
waiting
ago.
on ITI. integration.
So I mean, I'm like, that's an example of activity that needs to get done. We talked about that forever ago.
For sure, I just think it's one level down from the measurement. So like, you've got your objectives, you've got your indicators, and then under your indicators, you've got your activities that need to happen in order for you to be able to measure something.
It's almost as if you really wanted to make it more complex, not that we do, but you could have another column that would be called tasks. And then this column might be measurement of outcomes. And that ties back then to objectives. And I'm not suggesting that's what needs to be done, but that's how I'm thinking.
I have a question. We were talking about videos and so forth and putting them out. Do we know what the watchership, the viewership is of the cable TV? Where else is, there should be a way to find that out from Spectrum or whoever.
So we don't have that information right now, but I'm sure that is something that we definitely reach out.
Okay, because that, in a sense, what that would do is if you're showing a particular video at this particular time, you're going to be able to get feedback as to how many actually saw it and were subjected to it. That is a measurement rather than just to do. And you also, I hate to admit it, and are these videos available on the Facebook page? Okay, because that's my fault for not knowing all of it. And I think, again, that's where we don't necessarily, we don't know how many actually watch everything.
So these would be things that would be content that would be created both for channel 191 and social media as well as the website. So
Right, to be able to get the feedback, so I think you can get that from Facebook too, perhaps. So that would be, there's your measurement, is to be able to see how many people, what percentage of the citizenship actually saw the video or whatever. And that doesn't mean it was a bad video in any way, shape, or form. It just means that people either are interested or they don't know about it, which I have to do a lot of times.
Well, I mean, you can totally measure that on social media. So
Yeah.
that is a very easy.
right, and we're talking something as simple as what does the back truck do and how does it work, to something that can be more complex, like how do you get through the development process, and video, how-to videos, like along those lines. So it's not necessarily something that's just for social media. It could be something that's attached to the Facebook, not the Facebook page, but the website page for a particular
But that's
product.
kind of a customer service thing. Right? I think the customer service.
Right, yeah, and I mean,
Do we have anybody online with us, Ryan? We don't. do we? Okay. All right, I was just gonna, we can hear you, but if we had someone online, I'd ask you to speak up.
True, well, I mean, those
But
on
we're-
Facebook, if anybody's watching, imagine
We're good, we're
that.
good. We're good.
There's that.
I do want to give kudos though, like to the police department for like champion community relationships that foster entrepreneurship. That their monthly command staff business district walk and talks. I mean, that's actually getting out into the community, doing something that's not. Necessarily a normal expected thing of their jobs, where a lot of the other departments, it's about like attending board meetings that they darn well better be attending already. And it's not really going above and beyond.
You can definitely see a lot of creativity and forward thinking and how you get out into the community and actually engage.
Well, we beat our head against the wall a little bit. When we look at like, quality of life or continuing to improve the citizens' quality of life, I think I understand what you're saying, Councilwoman Schmitzer. When you start talking about targeting, like, how many tickets did you issue, how many arrests? We wanted to try and stay away from, not focus their energies on strictly data, because these are decisions that impact people's lives, and we don't want to be setting quotas or setting numbers out there that inspire them to do things they may not do ordinarily. So what we did was look at implementing case management to ensure that we start looking at the entire picture, all the facts and circumstances that our number one goal is to provide service excellence. So that means doing our due diligence. Did we respond in an appropriate manner? Did we follow up? Did we circle back? Did we look at every possible angle in terms of the existence or non-existence of evidence to identify the perpetrator and bring a case to fruition that way? So I think at the end of the day, it's early, but as we see our case management improve, correct me if I'm wrong, we will start to see a clearer picture of how we're doing efficiently. How efficient are we in closing cases? How efficient are we in making those arrests? And that sort of thing.
I 100% agree with you that it shouldn't be about quotas and it shouldn't be about like trying to get to a certain number of arrests or a certain number of tickets. And I really appreciated the first two measurements that you have about percent of citizen complaints resolved and the implementation of case management. I think that those are really strong and really important measures. I also think something that is really important to our community is public safety. And I think part of a police department's role and responsibility is the prevention of crime, and we absolutely cannot prevent specific crimes, but I think that a lot of the activities that you've outlined, hopefully the end result will be a decrease in crime because you have more patrols, because you have more citizen engagement, because you're in the community more. So I would like to see measurements around crime statistics in our community, for example. I think another area, you obviously can't control other agencies like the district attorney's office, but I think another area might be, your case reports and how they're submitted and whether they're returned for more information or whether they're submitted without errors. That might be another area where it's not about quotas, but it is about that service excellence that you've mentioned. So I absolutely think that there's so much that you can see that your police department is already doing. Like when you are out at community events, you're there. And I think that you see that reflected very, very clearly in this document as well about where you want to be and where you want to go. I just also think that there might be some broader measures that we might want to.
I'm sure they are. And I appreciate council developing this and Mr. Stevens bringing it to us and giving us focus. And giving us something to work towards in support of the city's goals, because that's important. Going back to what you were just referring to in terms of tracking reports that leave our office, go to the DA's office or municipal courts, or I'm wondering how we do that effectively without putting another hat on somebody who's already wearing 3 hats, because we don't have the ability to measure what you're suggesting. I don't know how we would do that, other than somebody literally tracking the number of reports, and there are thousands
Sure.
that go across the hall or across the road, and how many come back and how many were lacking or less than substantive, you know.
And I
I
think,
think it's a grand idea. I just don't know how we get there.
and that might be down the road part
Yeah.
of the case management system, if you're able to implement it. But I think honestly, you've hit on another huge underlying issue, which is the data source for each of these.
Yeah.
Do
Well,
we
that-
want to implement the annual community survey, and do we want to, how are we supposed to get all of the information? So, absolutely.
From a department perspective, this exercise really pointed out. You know, on community vitality, I sat down with a marker and highlighted 4 of them. That we don't have a process right now to discover. You know, so this is really a process of creating processes to get the data that you want to achieve. So at this point, when the departments looked at this, it was more like the goal was to create the process to get the data, which is necessary, you know, because this is all the information that would be ultimately very, very helpful and effective. But we have to create the process to get the data. We're dealing with a community that hasn't had really, I mean, processes are here. They're not necessarily documented as they would be in industry, or not even all industry documents. But this exercise right now is really more a matter of creating the processes to get the data that we're looking for. And, you know, you can either put the process in here, or you can put the data in here and realize you gotta get the process to create it. So maybe having a task column would be a good way to go. Whether that would be an annual task or an initial get it up and running task, you know, I guess it will vary from year to year.
And I think, you know, as we went through this, you know, there, you know, we do recognize this as an iterative process. We, you know, got to get started, got to get the ball rolling. As Rick said, he, saw the same thing on the public works side, where yes, we do this, but we don't necessarily track it. You know, so how do we analyze it? How do we track it? And you know, I think this first iteration is putting in the infrastructure to take us further.
And it's helped us. It has, because he and I sit down today, and, you know, as we're going through the list, he tries to keep a scorecard on us. We're missing things that should have been recorded, or there's a few things in here that we're not putting the focus of attention on that we need to. So it helps bring you in. Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want it to bog you down from doing your job.
Yeah.
And that's, I've seen that happen too in previous life.
Yeah, if I asked them to keep one more staff.
Yeah.
So,
Right, yeah, and I don't think that's the intention of it's
The goal is,
you know, overreach, you know, and micromanaging.
goal is to look at some of the things that we're already doing and put better processes and procedures behind them. And
Better
that-
metrics too.
Yeah, better metrics, so we can measure them. So, you know, it's hard to put a goal on something where you don't necessarily have this history on it.
So would it be fair to say that really if we're outcome oriented, what we're doing is we're taking our first shot at a target here. We're gonna stop and go look and see where the projectile landed, and then adjust from there. But nonetheless, there are some things here that probably need to be adjusted a little bit. Especially considering the comments about activities versus measurable results, or results measuring the results of the activities that achieve the goals.
Do you want to go through each?
I don't think that would be really a good use of our time. I don't think, and besides that, it would probably take us 3 or 4 meetings to do all
Well, I
of
just,
them.
I have notes on some of the pages and I
Uh-huh.
don't want to be like all over the place.
Yeah,
and giving
so-
recommendations.
So what do you think would be a good way to, because I'm sure there are several council members that have different notes at different places.
Yeah, I think if we can go through maybe department by department and get high level notes.
Just, yeah,
And,
yeah, we don't.
you know,
yeah.
as we, recognize themes, we can. Carry those through.
So on the first page, under learning and growth, and this is just a curious question. It seemed like almost every department under establish a culture of great customer service, almost everybody has percentage of staff completing customer service training. Have we ever done customer service training before? Will this be a new thing?
I think Cindy did one customer service training about a year or so ago, maybe longer.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a little bit.
Yeah.
We have done it in the past.
Yeah, and that was an in-house training.
So I was just wondering, I mean, is that sufficient for this year, or, I mean, because a lot of this is just like internal stuff, where we want to make sure that the customer, like, it's reaching the people, that they are getting served with better customer service. And I know the training will help with that. It just,
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's better.
but it was just kind of like a standard, like, do we need to think a little bit more about those interfaces with the public? I don't, just a question.
People's patience has gone out the window. So like with customer service, it's harder for people trying to solve people's problems, because people that have the problems are not having any patience whatsoever to be able to get the answer. And so it's one of those to where just that reminder of, take, and I'm the first one that can go from zero to ditch in about 2 seconds, so I have to be real careful. But it's one of those, when you're talking to customers, you put on a whole different hat, and a whole different attitude.
And I feel like when we're talking about QFIT at the police department, we talking about either also using that in some of our other city departments, or there perhaps was another tool that could be used so that people can take an optional survey after interactions.
Yeah, I thought.
Recom
Evergreen.
that made the purchase, and all the agencies that are serviced by Recom, Q-Hit's available. Dispatch is going to use Q-Hit. But I don't think we talked about the city. did we?
No, I think that there may have been an idea of, is there something like Q-Hit out for? But
So I do think, I mean, if the goal is establishing a culture of great customer service, we have to measure, as Ashley said, whether or not that our customers are experiencing that culture. As opposed to whether.
And I don't know, maybe first year it's training, next year, or, I mean, I guess you have that baseline to measure. But I don't want to make this too onerous.
Not to jump ahead or anything, but on the administration side, Tammy and Ivy and I sat down and discussed, being in that administration area, being a supportive role for other departments, a lot of our customers are also internal, we're supporting the other staff. So one thing that we had discussed was putting out a survey internally to our staff to see, what areas can we improve on for you guys, where we support you, how are we doing for you? Which kind of identifies more of that measurement and that actual metric that we can get back, but I'm wondering if there's something we could do. kind of
To
across the
broaden it,
board.
so it's not just an introverted internal survey, but it's a bit more broad.
And maybe to your point, maybe we could identify 2 or 3 of the strategic objectives that we want to focus on in the first year, and make sure that we identify really solid data sources that in some instances maybe already exist, or can be reached through an annual survey, or so that we're not trying to bite off more than we can chew all at once, or trying to roll out.
I couldn't
50
agree more.
50 new things.
I looked at this when Ryan first introduced it, and I don't know what I don't know, so it's gonna be an evolution.
Right. I agree.
And
Yeah, and I don't know, this is a lot to bite off, and want to make sure that it's.
we're
make
getting
it-
there.
Well, I think it would be helpful from a department perspective too. Establish a culture of great customer service. From. Well, Elijah's talked about admin's perspective. I have a lot more interaction with people out in the public, but what does that mean to you? As a council, you know, when you hand departments establish a culture of great customer service. How do they define that?
Exactly.
You know, how do they
And
define that?
everybody's got a different definition of that.
Everybody's
A
got
lot of it's like getting
If
their
you're in the building department, you're dealing with,
messages,
People
getting
are
their
angry.
phone calls answered.
You don't experience me.
you know, everybody loves the police department. Foam on the handcuffs, that makes it up on a multiple.
Well,
Yes.
so.
You know, so I think a little guidance in some of these from council, like this is our target. This is what we're trying to accomplish. I sat in on several. You know, a few of us were kind of like trying to train with kinds of people and sat in with several people and said, well, what does that mean? How do we define that? How do we really define that? And it's such a subjective thing. There could be some key statistic out there that we could use. Maybe it does come from, maybe it's more of a Canyon City in general stat metric that comes from surveys or something that each department then works towards somehow in their own department. And I think what Elijah was talking about too, and I heard other people say this, is like, well, in my department, I don't speak with anybody outside of our department, you know. So how am I helping the city in providing good customer service? So it's a challenge. It's a challenge for a lot of people internally.
And that's, you know, city administration, you know, is most, you know, a lot of that was internal customers, the fleets and facilities, you know, they're dealing with internal customers. So, you know, not just how you're treating the public, but how do you respond to your coworkers?
Whoever your customer is.
So I'm just on the first page, we've got 14 strategic objectives and 26 measures. And so just looking at that particular one, that means that you have to achieve one of your measures every other week. You know, which is.
Get on it.
Not
Yeah.
good.
Sure.
So I think that what I'm hearing and what it sounds like to me is that we need to be able to pare this down to something manageable that we can start measuring and start achieving our goals of, let's call it transparency or citizen satisfaction or whatever, because that truly is the city's goal, is to provide the infrastructure and the, all of the other things that go along with that. Enforcement of rules and stuff so that citizens can lead their lives productively and happily and as free as they can be.
And I completely agree, Mayor Pro Tem. And in addition to kind of those 2 or 3 overarching, I think for most of our departments, there is an external data source. And on the roads, you've got the OCI index. With water department, they've got their testing. With stormwater, we have compliance rates for what can go into the Arkansas. So like, I feel like there are some external data points that are maybe longer term, but that we could potentially use to get to the heart of what each department is really supposed to be doing, in addition to transparency, fiscal responsibility, and positive interactions with people.
But on this first page, John, and as you say, there's 26 measures, and I see a lot of percents and numbers. And who is going to be tracking all that? Who tracks that? So, I mean, is there something? I mean, or is it somebody different in every department?
It's gonna be different in every
But
department.
they are designated. It's not just that, whoever can do it.
Yeah, as we roll this out, yeah, they're gonna have to, departments are gonna have to work through
Because
that.
people get busy, the departments get busy. And if you don't have someone, and you don't realistically assign that person hours to do that. You say, well, just work it into your schedule. That ever works. To say no. So,
For example, in the police department,
I am specifically tasked with tracking. So when you look at the police department's page, the second page, I believe, is the it has our targets. And I maintain my own spreadsheet that is based on what you see in front of you. And it also has a current listing on it that compares to how we are compared to our target. And along with that, in my notes on the side of that, I have what we have planned for the future as well. So as an example, roughly quarterly, Chief Schick and I sit down and go through this. And I know when that discussion is coming up, and I make a point of. So some of these issues I'm directly involved in, it's very easy for me to track. Some of them are delegated to tracking other members of the department. And so when I know this discussion is coming up, I just take a walk through the department and I, for example, go to BJ Serta, who does our crime prevention. And I talk to her about how many crime prevention activities that we completed since the last time I talked, and I update my list. So it's for the police department, and I won't speak for other departments, but for us, it's actually fairly manageable to track.
So how many hours would you estimate a week that you spend on this tracking?
Ma'am, if it's 30 minutes over the course of a month, I'd be surprised. It's actually pretty quick. Now, if we change some of the measurements, that might change. But as it is right now, it's actually fairly simple for me to maintain a reasonably accurate accounting of where we are as far as all of our goals.
So you have the time and the open slots when to track this. That's not like adding to the quick one. You already
No,
have.
it's not a significant obstacle for you to get with it.
I have a question. You guys all, does each department like have a staff meeting every so often, or do you have safety meetings and things that way? I'm wondering if would it be helpful at all, just, let's face it, we get tied into what we're used to doing and we're doing it on a daily basis. To take 5 minutes in those monthly meetings or whatever they are, and just go through the list again as far as an overall goal, to be able to just keep it to the top of your mind as to kind of like what he does just with the group. But that might be helpful just to remind all of us are involved in this. And it doesn't hurt for us as a council to remind ourselves that we have.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate goal is, we have department head, senior staff meetings after every council meeting and, spreading these out throughout the course of the quarter. So everybody kind of can touch base with, other department heads as far as accountability. I have one-on-one meetings with staff where we would plan on going through all of these measures once they're finally set and for check-ins and those types of things as well.
Because that would be the one thing I would, you sit here and you see annual on almost every one of them, and it would be one of those to where you sort of need to keep a running total in order to be able to keep your focused on the goals. And so once a year perhaps is not necessarily.
Yeah, there'll be ongoing maintenance.
What's the purpose of the target column?
We will set the targets for each department on those goals.
So percent of, let's, for instance, on the first page, first line, percent of CFIX complaints resolved. The quarterly and the target would be 90% or 70%, whatever the appropriate percentage would be. That would be the target.
And if they're always, from my perspective, at least, the targets are always the hardest to set at the onset because you don't have a baseline.
Yeah.
So it's almost like throwing wet pasta at a board. You can see what sticks and you may have to revise targets. But you should have a reason why you're setting whatever target you are.
I'm not a proponent of the customer's always right. And so it's one of those where you're not gonna have, odds are you're gonna have somebody that isn't 100% satisfied. But if you've done everything you can, I think that needs to be noted too, because you're not gonna satisfy everybody based on either circumstance, the request or whatever. So I mean, you don't want to set people up to fail, and there's no way everybody can meet everybody's demands.
Well, and it's kind of like what the chief was telling us for the police department on case management,
Yes.
where they come back and look and, re-examine assumptions, re-examine actions to the extent that they can to make sure that there was not some, provoking condition.
All dealt with those.
You're right, but, so. So that's just a comment, I guess.
I would also say like on the police department, on their first two, they also include the time frame in the measure, which I think is super important and really great to see. Because, for example, the one that we took at first, on the very first page, the first one, percent of C++ complaints resolved. Like, if we're measuring this on a quarterly basis and something takes 6 months to resolve, then like, does it count or does it not? So I think including timeframes where it makes sense is also a good idea.
And from my perspective, I think Commander Walsh is right. Tracking the actual metrics does not take an extra amount of time. But what it does do is it makes sure that we as staff focus on the areas and create or participate in those activities where we can track measurements, and that is what takes the time. So I think we want to make sure that we're meeting the goals that you as council want to see, and that we're in the right direction with some of these goals and activities and measurements, and that we're not moving away from what you guys want to see as well.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily this is what the goals that council wants, it's more what our the citizens want, and really the comprehensive plan that is the ultimate guide of where we're trying to all be on that same trajectory.
How do other council members feel about the annual survey idea? It's kind of referenced in here a bit. It seems like some of these you get through that, but I don't know.
I think if we do an annual survey with citizens, you're gonna get a percentage back, and you're gonna get the higher, a very small percentage are gonna be brought in. That's what you're gonna base on, and then after that, the percentage that did not do it are gonna be the ones who are gonna be either, they're gonna be the ones complaining like crazy.
So we.
I mean, and percentage wise, I don't think you're gonna get it. You're not gonna get 50% back.
Well, you don't have to get 50% back to have an accurate, I mean, if you have a company that does scientific surveys and does it right, which we did them several years ago, we had a company that did it, we actually got really good feedback, it was pretty accurate. I mean, you'll always have, no one's ever gonna be really happy with government, because that's just never gonna happen.
Right.
But we do have some baselines based on several years ago. It would be interesting to see where we've come from then. We also, on those annual surveys, before we did projects, like before we did Centennial Park, that was in the survey. Would you support improvements at Centennial Park? And it was like 98% of the citizens said yes. So we felt really confident in moving forward. And I forgot, it also had, one of the surveys had asked, should the mayor have a vote? And I forgot about this in our discussion, and it was less than 50%. Most people didn't think so. And so sometimes it is helpful to us to guide where our priorities are and make sure we're in sync with the community. But I've been kind of thinking about that. Most of our projects, we're right now, we're not really doing anything new. We're just trying to finish up what we've started like pre-COVID practically. So we don't have as many of those questions to ask, but it does ask a lot of customer service questions for all different.
Those surveys, the survey company would randomly select or send out to, I want to say it was 1,500 households, was that many?
Yeah, that's about right.
And, the return rates was probably in the 400 to 500 range.
And the survey company felt like that was pretty, like within the 4% marks. That's how, and that's where we also had asked about the passing the 1% street tax. And so that was looking good, and just all these different kinds of things.
It doesn't have to all be just project oriented. It could be in the area of figuring out what works best to engage the community, how do they find out what they want to know about the city and what the city's doing? Things like that.
Especially so so I think there are some things like communicate, how can it better communication.
We did 3 in a row, wasn't it? 3 in a row that we did. 3 in a row. We did 3 surveys in a row. And I think at the end of the last survey, what my personal feeling is that it was really overkill. 3 in a row was really overkill, expensive. There were some absolutely critical questions that council took into account as they went through and made decisions about which directions to go and things like that. But the problem that you run into is with the survey company, you get all these free questions, essentially, for if you look at it that way, you get all these free questions. And so you can get a lot of questions on there that really don't have a lot of meaning or relevance.
I wonder though if we did an annual survey and we included just like a couple of these questions, like, do you believe a couple of questions tied to specific strategic objectives, like, do you believe Canyon City continually improves the citizens' quality of life? Do you believe that Canyon City offers a culture of great community government, I guess? But I wonder if we did that and we just did it on an annual basis for the ones that are more about public perception and public opinion. Why not just take that off of the department's plate and just ask the people, like, do we actually, have we established an identity in the nurture community?
What would not be bad too, would be nice to throw this right on IT's lap, is to sit there, if, do we send out like mass emails as far as to residents, because
Yeah,
it's hard to get our message out.
it's one of
And
the objectives in here.
the object, not necessarily for this, but the objective would be for anything we're trying to get out. Did you know that if you go to Facebook so-and-so, you can see this video? Or if you go on to channel 119 or whatever it is, you could do this. And what I'm thinking is just another way to communicate, because it's, you get the feedback of bitch, excuse me, but they complain a little bit, but they aren't informed as to what really the other side of things are. And so this is an opportunity to be proactive rather than reactive. And so I was thinking about that, and that would be something that could be on the survey, is to say, would you like to know more information on a periodic basis? If you are, and we're not gonna send it out every day. You may not send it out once a month, but at least it gives them an opportunity to see something that might give them more information about what the city is doing.
And that was the point for, behind some of these measures, is to be more proactive than reactive and have things that are gonna describe, what processes are, why things are, why a certain thing works the way it does, or, how departments work, from a customer service standpoint, those types of things.
Well, and I'd take it further that whenever it's the city's doing something cool, if something cool is happening, like groundbreaking for fixing Reynolds, it's gonna happen, press release, send it out, get it out the news, get KOA down here and really
Well, even
making
try
sure
to
the good stuff gets.
Get the
out.
veterans there to Florence, on Thursday. I said, put it out on next door, just to be able to try and get it out there too. So it's just, try to get, hit them however the heck you can get their attention for, and it's not easy.
And if you're doing these surveys, I think that a lot of surveys, if someone is diligent enough to finish a survey and you ask them a question, or you say, do you agree with the statement, Canyon City continually improves its citizens' quality of life? They're gonna say yes, or they're,
Very, yes,
Right.
strongly.
yeah. But here's the thing, why not ask them, do you feel as though your quality of life is improved over a year ago? Instead of, do you just agree with the statement? Maybe.
And
That's a big question, if you add inflation and. all this other problem.
That's our entire.
Yeah, they.
Survey did ask, similar types of questions. What,
Yeah, more
Yes.
specific,
some of what we saw, and I don't know
and we
where
could,
this falls in, but one, results of the survey. I think when you have PD and sheriff's office, some of the public safety questions, there's a skew and understanding about you know, is the public safety, you know, are they responding because of an interaction with the police department? Or are they responding this way because of an interaction with the sheriff's office? Or what was the headline when that survey went out that week in the newspaper?
Yeah, and they have, there's kind of a science to it, that and for some of these questions, like they actually already, if we choose to do it, they already have standard questions for a lot of that stuff. And they ask the other communities that they surveyed the exact same questions, and you can kind of see where you lie in comparison to other communities.
One of the problems that if we do a survey to talk about the strategic objectives, like Canyon City continually improves its citizens' quality of life. We've got 10 sheets. We have 10 different areas that sometimes made up of multiple departments. And so you can't really ask it in a general sense. You have to say, does the police department contribute to Canyon City residents continually improving quality of life?
And I think the survey can do it by
But so what I'm pointing out is that then you've got 10 different questions that all deal with quality of life, because you got 10 different departments.
But we could probably have a whole nother meeting just on that
Well, certainly,
survey.
yeah.
So we should probably
Yeah.
redirect back to this. And now we know that there's an interest in it. Maybe we can do some more research and bring it back to council for further
Yeah,
consideration.
we'll look at annual survey, but we'll also look at something and see if there's anything similar to Cupid that can be a little bit more granular.
I've got a specific question. On many of the sheets under financial, spend tax dollars efficiently and responsibly. The measure is percent of department of projects finished on time and on budget. And how do you calculate that percent? Because that's two different variables. And so how would you calculate that? So
Say more of what you mean by.
So, okay, so if you've got a particular project, you might be on time, but way over budget.
Right.
You might be way over time, but under budget.
So
And
that's,
so,
it's an and statement, so the project would have to meet both. It'd have to be completed on time and on budget.
so,
So the report could be, it was on time.
but what
it
if,
was on budget.
what about the exceptions? Did they get put into the denominator or not?
They have to.
So that's
Yeah,
my,
so I think if, you know, for instance, a street project that's delayed because we have 2 weeks of rain
or CDOT
or
nonsense.
forces see that.
Supply issues.
Yeah, I think, you know, what we're looking for is from when that project is awarded and started, did it complete on,
Mhm.
you know, within its allowed budget and timeframe. And when we, you know, when we have exceptions like weather or other mitigating circumstances, you know, we do change orders, which, you know, would allow for more time in the cases where there may be an exception for something small.
So it's not based on our independent government cost estimate and our planned timeframe. It's based on when it's actually awarded and what the budget at award is. I feel like those are two very different ways of measuring it.
And I think that, you know, depending on the project or the department, there are different things.
Well, you gotta think, what does the city have control over?
Right.
They have no, there's a lot of things they have no control over. You know, did they ask an appropriate amount of time? Let's face it, if you're dealing, well, I'm gonna say Excel, because that was my old stomping grounds. My God, you didn't want, if you wanted an electric meter, you damn well better give them 6 months, because you weren't gonna get it any sooner. And the house was being finished tomorrow, so, yeah. But that was Excel problem, that was the customer problem. So, I mean, you have things that you have control over and things you don't.
So what I would say about that is that if you have a project, you can paper it over with change orders, you know, and that means that you didn't do a good job designing it. So it's really like a number of change order type measurement. The other thing that you can say about that is the metric would be how close was the department's estimate for our budgetary purposes to the final cost? Not percent finished on time and on budget. Because there's too many variables that change that, and you can be as clever or as cunning as you want in establishing that metric and not get to something that means something.
Yeah, and when I said change orders, I'm not talking about changes in the project itself, but extensions because of weather delays and the exceptions that you're talking about. But yes.
To take my point,
Take
though.
the point.
Yeah,
That was discussed in the early stages of this too. You have to look at the metrics and, what kind of action are you trying to create? And what kind of action are you actually creating? with
right.
The metric.
And what are we?
If you're creating one where they're creating change orders just to make it look good, then it's not a good metric.
Right.
So how do you
So-
balance that?
So to me, projects finished on time and on budget is not a good thing to try and measure. I think you've got to look at the, like I said, whether your original estimate compares to the final budget expenditure. And there can even be things that creep into that are beyond our control, like inflation, like the cost of asphalt,
And that's why your target shouldn't be 100%.
Yeah. Right. And so, but nonetheless, that if there's a metric with an explanation like that, it needs to be something that we control, because there's a lot that we don't.
If you think about that too, in terms of project management, if you have a project manager who's looking at a project, he's already assessing whether we're gonna be on time or not.
Right.
Then working the project, hopefully being able to work the project to get it back on time. That's obviously a staffing concern if you don't have people who are good project managers, or don't have project managers in general. But,
But there's a difference too between contract projects and in-house projects. And so you have to recognize that, because what you said is appropriate for in-house projects. Contract projects end up in a different category because.
correct, yeah.
You know,
And I'm just saying, in that case, it puts somebody's time into trying to make that project work according to the schedule, and it may not ever work according to the schedule, but they're gonna put in the effort to try to make it work. And which to some extent, the assertiveness can be good, can be helpful. But to some extent, it's wasted time because it's not gonna work.
So on this particular one, street departments, street department projects finished on time and on budget, was that intended to cover only internal projects, or was that intended to cover contract projects also?
For the streets department, they do most of their projects in-house. They have some contracted, like chip seal and crack seal, but a large portion of the streets projects are actually done in-house.
And that's really what we're interested in, I think, is because we're talking about us,
Right. But when you're talking, engineering department where they're bidding out QA projects and things like that, that's a situation where less of their work is in-house and most of their work is managing the contracted projects.
So there's two activities there that gets back to my original point. There's the planning. Okay, and metrics around planning are important. And then there's the implementation, the carrying out of the contract and how that contract is managed.
And I would say, in addition to the planning needing to be about having the right plan in terms of cost and timeline, also, are you choosing the right project? And are you making those strategic choices correctly around spending the dollars efficiently?
And that almost gets back to us, because we set the direction.
To an extent, I mean, we approve them, but we don't generate them. I mean, the city,
We could.
the city staff are the ones who are bringing the projects forward.
True.
And I mean, maybe we should have a city council strategic objectives and measures. Do we have 90% of city council members attend 100% of our meetings?
Attendance is not the best measure. I mean, we should put more on ourselves than just showing up, right?
Absolutely, that was just when I came up with that. I also wonder around, just still on the first page, the second strategic objective, customer focused, business friendly community. It seems like both of the measures around new businesses and business prospects. And I think part of being business friendly is also, around retention, but also your existing business nurturing, and just curious about those two, I guess, and if there's a way to take into account existing businesses in the business friendly community. Cool.
On the topic of business friendly and also, championing entrepreneurship, economic resilience. I don't know what we put, but I mean, there's been a lot of conversations about expanding the life safety grant to, for like putting codes in to make commercial kitchens, or just all those other little things that could help our historic downtown or businesses, and wondered if some of those things might, is it be appropriate to put in there too? That would be something I'd like to see happen in the next year.
Mayor, I can't quite hear you. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
So those things that those are some goals that we've talked about, but if we can put it in as something to be measured, that way I feel like it will actually get done, instead of we've just been talking a lot about a lot of things and not necessarily actually implementing a lot of those things.
So we're on the community vitality
Mhm.
page, and we're under economic development, the middle objective, champion community relations that will foster entrepreneurship. And what you're saying is that, considering all of the life safety type things, and, is there some way to get some of that in?
Yeah, and that's where some of the comprehensive plan stuff kind of get plugged in, so they actually get done.
It is. I don't know that we specifically looked at the URA groups that into community vitality, but we probably could as a utilization of well, that kind of goes back to something I think we saw in the administration, the utilization of community grant programs or something along those lines.
Yeah, that way, I think if it's here, then I'm like, well, yeah, it's gonna get done, because it's here, it's the forefront, we want to be able to check that off by the end of the year. And that includes things like downtown parking and stuff, something we're already working on, why not give yourself some credit and plug it in there, and that's something that's measurable, if we can accomplish that task that we want done. Or the clock tower, or just some of those different things too. Or like I mentioned before, public art, creating that council and things like that. Or that would be more under nurturing community pride.
Well, I do think that annually, some of these goals would change.
Yeah,
based
yeah,
on
absolutely.
So, yeah.
This is a living document.
It is a living process.
Every year, we're getting better.
Yeah. And some of it too, complete line items of the comp plan, well, which ones? There's like 800 of them, which ones do you prioritize on that? So that's gonna come from you, I would think.
So do we, I want to make sure that if every council member, if they have specific comments or concerns on a particular item, that we discuss those in some manner. I think that's important. Is there anything?
I just have a more
Yeah,
general
Sure.
question, but
Mhm.
we talked a little bit about tying the comprehensive plan and all those priorities in with this, and I'm just trying to think, how do you envision actually kind of technically being able to do that? How would that fit together? just something with a lot of links or footnotes, or what would it look like?
Like on the computer or whatever, so you can see how it needs to be.
Maybe it's a 3D model.
Make
Or
it just
4D, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, from a comprehensive plan, we've got the downtown strategic plan, the riverfront plan, what we've heard from council is, we don't want plans to just sit on a shelf and,
right.
the goal for having that in there is to make sure that we're actually taking actionable steps to, envisioning those plans, so that, it actually gets more done at the budget side when we're bringing forward projects. We want to make sure that we're bringing forward the projects that are going to move those comprehensive plans and the special plans forward. And that's really what that was envisioned as. So, those, using the comprehensive plan as the guiding document, you build that into the strategic plan by, we're taking steps towards actually achieving these goals. And then those projects are the ones that we're talking about getting finished on time and on budget. And it kind of flows through the entire document. that
So
way.
maybe it's just almost as a reference document, figuring out how these objectives map to that document. It's not necessarily changing what anybody does, but just understanding those connections and being able to demonstrate that.
So would that be the one way to do that would be to take the master plan or, whichever plan, and when, for instance, on our master plan right now, we have all of these action items. And it would be just as simple as saying, if we numbered the strategic objectives 1 through 14, because those are all the same, which strategic objectives that particular activity concerns.
Yeah, it could be that, not all of the objectives in the comprehensive plan are gonna map back to these particular strategic objectives. It's more about the work plan for the year.
Kind of the process for achieving these.
Right. And comp plan, is more of a comprehensive plan is more of a planning document. It isn't necessarily going to be as applicable to, something like the police department. They're going to have their own strategic objectives and goals that aren't going to tie directly to something like a comprehensive plan.
I think you could potentially, in the same way that most of the pages have percentage of identified regulations codes that have been simplified. I think you could potentially go through and identify which ones in the comp plan and in whatever map to which department, which I already have, and it's not. And then instead of doing the number of action items completed from each of these, you could do percentage of identified ones that have been completed. And then it gives you more of that measure of where are you in the overall completion
Of the
of the
document itself.
identified ones for that particular.
So we muddied the water horribly for you here.
I think so.
Yeah, then go home and say, oh, dang, another one.
But you're reacting to that a little bit, what's your feeling?
Oh, this is my empathetic feeling of
Oh,
sympathy and support for the hard work that has already gone into this document and the work that will continue to go into it for many, many years.
If it means anything, in the corporate world, I sat through so many of these, trying to do the same thing, and change it from activity to action measurable, and it's harder than heck sometimes, and so I think this is, you're on the right track, definitely on the right track.
Thank you.
So Ryan, on the community vitality, we talked before, and most of what my personal interactions with voters and community and residents is that they aren't getting those city alerts from our website. And so I just saw that's under Rick's department, his community vitality. So do we have a plan in place to get new users signed up for the city alerts?
So that would be the measure, so we would have to,
So we do have a plan in place.
that's what all of this is about.
Right.
Christie and I are working toward that right now on a couple of
And
initiatives.
so you have some.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a plan in place right now unless Christie has a plan that I don't know about. but
Right.
Yeah.
We're generating
We're
ideas
generating
for
ideas,
how-
yeah.
To do that. Someone.
We have
Well, when
to.
the very first came out, I think they had a goal of 1,000. I don't even know if we have 1,000 now. Probably not.
Probably less than 200.
Less than 200.
It's
I
not-
remember we said that because Preston was mayor and he was gonna like dress up in a disco outfit and do something in public if we could hit a certain benchmark. Yeah.
That-
Didn't even get
For that, I would have
close.
made 1,000.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and that kind of an initiative doesn't necessarily take a lot of time. It's really figuring out how you want to do it, having conversations about it, and then when it's there, you assess it to see if it's working. You know, the challenge is how do you engage? How do how, what is the best tool for engagement? There's tools out there though that can help each department individually engage and track those engagements and interface with social media to get some responses.
And as far as signing up for the email blast, I think the best tool that I've seen is the citizens who are signed up for it and them talking about it, because they get the information and they talk about how it's this easy. How can you not know what's going on? Because
Yeah.
How did you know that? Or
No, I'm
another
just
thing, maybe every time the city posts on Facebook or whatever, there could just be a link and.
Yeah, that might
Just
be a good idea.
have it a routine thing, for more information about city activities, sign up for alerts and just have that link always.
It used
Where-
to, the link used to be on the, like a banner on the city's
be right.
website and I don't see it anymore.
I think we changed it with the 150, but you can still get to it by going to how do I, so you can still sign up, we just don't have it at the top.
Very
Yeah.
good.
And that's probably part of the problem is it's not that evident.
Right, yeah, and maybe if they're just we could even do like an animation or something, when they come on the website, sign up.
A little moving paperclip.
Something like that. Yeah.
Elijah's not.
Yeah.
We have this poll on Facebook with this information.
it's actually right under the banner where sesquicentennial says create an account, increase your productivity. We probably changed some of that wording now.
No, on my phone, it says Centennial and it's COVID-19 information.
So on the mobile side, it's probably different.
And you might turn your phone sideways. Sometimes you get.
Well, and do we really need to have COVID on the top anymore? I mean.
Yeah. We can change some of that.
I do have one other comment. When I was a student at the University of Nevada, Reno, I worked at the Bureau of Mines, which was a government research laboratory. Okay, and they did research. And what they did is they put in for whatever Jim Cracker pieces of equipment they wanted in their budget. Okay, and they made up a budget, and then at the end of the budget year, which was a fiscal year for them, if they hadn't spent their budget, it was open the catalogs and buy as many things as they could. And so I'm looking at the last page, administration, under customer be resource, under financial spend that tax dollars efficiently responsibility, percent of budget utilized, that always leads to a bad outcome.
I think the intention with that one was more along the lines of, like we were discussing before, in our estimates and how much our actual budgets came in on place. So, one, we don't want to go over budget, of course, but more importantly, we want to make sure that we're utilizing our budgets for what we estimated we were going to throughout the year. So that not that you're just opening up a catalog and ordering things that you didn't plan for. that you
Maybe
actually
it's just a wording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't sound like we're doing what. you
Planned or
described.
appropriated. or-
Yes.
And the
the other part of it was if we were going to look at it as if you have a department that continually budgets $200,000 on a line. And they always spend 50,000. It's looking at that saying, okay,
as
there's
bad as-
$150,000 that this department has that we cannot use to provide for other areas to help with the services. So that's some of the other things that we were going to try to look at.
And
with
but
that.
I understand that, but the problem is, if I'm that department head, then I open my catalog, you know? And so that's the crux of the matter and the challenge in getting a metric there that doesn't create the outcome you don't want.
You
Yeah,
end up
we
at-
do have some safeguards in there, whereas. You know, you can't just go and purchase something from a catalog for contracted services. You know, those take council budget, approvals and amendments and things like that. But
So maybe
certainly understand your point.
that might just, it might be just wording or something, or, some
This
other,
is-
metrics along
A
the
better way to.
Has the city ever unfortunately had to go through, say, now fourth quarter, and you gotta cut your budget by 10% before the end of the year?
We did that during COVID, not knowing what was
What-
gonna happen on the revenue side.
Because unfortunately, I've been through that too, but we're all of a sudden, you damn well better find something to cut out quickly because we aren't making what we thought we were making.
Yeah, we did that in 2020.
And we did that early on. We didn't even wait till mid-year. We were, I want to say, what, April,
Yeah,
May, we started.
In April, I asked all the departments to give a 10% and a 20% budget.
And that's hard to do, but it is reality, so I just, unfortunately.
And normally you budget so conservatively that we haven't had that issue.
Mhm.
Besides COVID, I don't think we've ever had.
I do think that there are a number of kind of terms in some of the measures, particularly in the administration one, that may need to be a little bit better defined. Like number of goals we can support, percentage of goals supported. Number of growth development opportunities provided, just like what do those things actually mean? And I know that you're trying to cover a lot, if you're doing HR, finance, city clerk and IT, you're trying to cover a lot of different areas with one measure, but I do think that if we added in a few more words or a little bit more of a definition, it might make it a little bit more clear.
So part of our action plan on that was we were going to have a survey that we sent to our departments to see what ways they felt that we could support them and go from there. So that was going to become our goal, and how many of those we could actually support, because they may be asking for things from us that there's no way we can do. And so we had we kind of had some action plans that we discussed on how we were going to do it. But to get it into a very limited number of words for this plan was, you don't see the whole thing,
Absolutely.
so it's almost going back to having those tasks in there.
So I wanted to go back and just kind of working through in my mind something that Tammy and Elijah and then maybe others were talking about just a couple of minutes ago, and that is, when I think about the budgeting process, and is there any kind of measure related to how well departments are doing in projecting costs? And, is that something that should be measured? In other words, it kind of goes back to the $200,000 example you gave, but also just in general. Is that part of the process working well, and does there need to be a measure of that budgeting process?
Right. Yeah, so when we ask departments to create their estimates for the year, some actually will go through and take the time to come up with the realistic number. Others will say, I'm just gonna spend my entire budget, even though they know they're not going to. By them doing that, it then makes it that we may have less funding available for the next year. Or if they underestimate, it could go the other direction. So
That seems like something to put a goal in here. It has to do with that, what do we call it, that
Man-
efficiently spend
spending
tax
taxpayers'
dollars.
money. Yeah.
That, you know, even just that budgeting process, depending on how it's done and how it's monitored, can make a difference. Because if someone's just throwing a big figure out year after year, some other department maybe is not able to spend something.
Mhm.
Not playing the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Right.
that's part of what Tammy and I are doing right now.
Right.
is
I'm sure.
Going through line items and, is this really something this department's gonna do this year? Is this something that's needed? And really ratchet down.
Mhm. And then I guess you could, if you wanted to do even more with the time that we don't have, it's just tying it back in that process that you're doing, tying it back to priorities and these kinds of objectives to me.
Okay, do we have any more discussion? We're getting kind of long here, so.
I have a lot of very specific feedback, but I've given a lot of it to Ryan already.
That's a good way to do it, if you actually have a lot of specific feedback to give it to Ryan, so that he's got it. It's good. Is good.
Overall, thank you. Really appreciate you being here and being a
Yeah.
part of the process and for all that you do. And this is really exciting. Appreciate it.
We'll make some adjustments and go from there.
And with that, we adjourn.
Thank you.